I used to be a soldier, 4 years in the military, living through the harshest days a soldier could imagine. But never once did I feel the unease like when I stepped into the Dalton Power Plant. It was a small place, quietly nestled among tree-covered hills, hardly remarkable compared to other grand structures. My job sounded simple. Operate a power plant that supplied energy to a single building located on a nearby hill. A building without a name, without signs, and no one told me what it used the electricity for. Nathan, the previous manager, told me on my first day, "You'll see some strange things here, but don't worry, they won't affect your work." He smiled, but his eyes seemed to warn me of something. I didn't understand, but I didn't ask further. With my military experience, I knew well that sometimes it's best not to dig too deep. At first, everything seemed normal. The plant ran smoothly, the equipment worked at full capacity, but then, bit by bit, strange things began to happen. First were the calls from James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense. He called me once a week, his voice steady, asking vague, puzzling questions. "Do you see everything at the plant still normal? In case of an emergency, how quickly can you shut off all power?" These questions had nothing to do with my daily work, but I still answered, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing doubt inside me. My colleagues didn't help either. They worked like machines, their eyes always vacant, never meeting mine directly. Once, I caught Robert, a technician, sitting in the break room, chewing on a pencil for 10 minutes without realizing what he was doing. When I asked him, he only muttered, "The schedule says I have a 10-minute break." On the exact 10th minute, he stood up and left the room without saying another word. The atmosphere in the plant was always cold, not because of the temperature, but because of an uncomfortable feeling, as if something was watching me. I couldn't precisely describe it, but it was always there, like an invisible shadow following my every step. The longer I stayed here, the more I felt myself being drawn into a web of mystery I couldn't escape. Mattis's questions, the odd behavior of my colleagues, and the building on the hill all seemed like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. But I knew, sooner or later, I would have to face the truth, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to endure it. From the very first day working at the Dalton Power Plant, I sensed an indescribable anomaly. It wasn't from the equipment or operational systems; they functioned perfectly, without a hitch but from the people. My colleagues, one by one, carried an air of lifelessness, like shadows. They worked on time, followed procedures precisely, but showed absolutely no creativity or initiative. Robert, a technician, was the clearest example. I once caught him sitting in the break room absent-mindedly chewing on a pencil for 10 minutes straight. When I asked him what he was doing, his answer was nothing more than a mumble. "The schedule says I have a 10-minute break." On the exact 10th minute, he stood up and left the room without saying another word. These actions, repeated by everyone, made me feel as if I were living among machines, not humans. The atmosphere in the plant was always cold and isolated, as if this place existed outside the world I once knew. Day by day, I realized more and more that I was working in a place unlike any other plant. The strangest thing was the financial operations. Megan, the only employee in charge of this area, explained to me that no money was ever sent from customers. All operating costs for the plant were sent from an office in Washington, D.C., and they had never refused any expense. "Just send the report, and they'll handle it," she said with a forced smile, her eyes filled with worry. The calls from James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, only made things more confusing. He called me every few weeks, his voice steady, almost emotionless, asking vague questions so unclear that I didn't even know what I was answering. "Do you see everything at the plant still normal?" he asked during one call. "In the event of an emergency, how quickly can you shut off all power?" These questions, combined with the strange silence of my colleagues and the unusual financial operations, made me feel as if I were being drawn into a mysterious web I couldn't understand. But what worried me most wasn't the questions or the odd human behavior. It was the feeling a discomforting sensation, as if something invisible was watching me every second of every minute. I began to ask myself, why would a small plant that only supplies energy to a single building require the attention of the Secretary of Defense? Why does everything here operate as if it doesn't belong to this world? These unanswered questions made me feel as though I was standing before a closed door, behind which lay a dangerous, powerful entity waiting for me to step inside. That morning, as I was inspecting the electrical systems in the control room, a strange sound echoed from outside. The heavy roar of an engine shattered the usual silence that enveloped the place. I stepped outside and saw a black van, without a license plate, slowly entering the plant's premises. The van looked old, its black paint glossy but covered in dust, as if it had just traveled a long, mysterious road. No one at the plant seemed surprised by the van's arrival. Nathan, the manager, simply stepped out of his office and signaled Robert and Megan, the two technical staff, to get into the van. No explanation, no questions. Both of them quickly climbed inside. The door shut with a sharp clack. The black van quietly turned around, heading toward the road that led up the hill where the mysterious building stood. I stood there, watching the van disappear behind the rows of trees. A sense of unease surged within me. No one said anything about the van's arrival, nor did anyone seem curious about Robert and Megan being taken away. Everyone continued working as if nothing had happened, but I knew this wasn't a normal occurrence. 3 hours later, the black van returned. This time, I stood closer to observe. The door opened, and Robert and Megan stepped out, but something was off. They looked like versions of themselves, but not entirely themselves. Their skin was unnaturally pale, their eyes hollow, devoid of the light of life. Robert, who usually spoke to me curtly, but with energy, now only mumbled incoherent phrases when I tried to ask him what had happened. "Everything is fine," he said, his voice monotone, lifeless. Megan didn't even respond. She just stared at me, her gaze unfocused, as though she was looking through me into an endless void. I tried to ask them about what had happened on the hill, but their answers only deepened my confusion. "I don't remember clearly," Robert said weakly. We met someone, I think, but I'm not sure." Megan merely shook her head, said nothing, and turned away. The arrival of the black van completely changed the atmosphere at the plant. It was no longer just cold and isolated now. It carried an eerie, chilling feeling, as if an invisible entity was creeping through every corner, watching my every breath. I knew I couldn't ignore this. Robert and Megan had gone up the hill, and when they returned, they were no longer themselves. But what had happened up there? Who or what was waiting inside that mysterious building? These questions kept swirling in my mind, and I began to realize that I was facing something far beyond human comprehension, a supernatural entity, dangerous and immensely powerful. The feeling of unease had turned into an obsession, clinging to me ever since the black van appeared. The strange behavior of Robert and Megan after their trip up the hill left me unable to stop thinking about that mysterious building. It wasn't just a place out of sight, it was the center of all the bizarre events happening at the plant. I knew that if I wanted to uncover the truth, I had to investigate it myself. That night, when everyone had left the plant, I decided to act. Armed with a flashlight and a fragile sense of courage, I began my journey up the hill. The winding path was dark, surrounded by dense rows of trees. The air was colder than I had expected, as though the temperature dropped with every step I took closer to my destination. When I arrived, I found myself standing before a sight unlike anything I had ever imagined. The mysterious building wasn't an ordinary structure. It was nestled in a small valley, but the most striking feature wasn't its surface, it was what lay beneath. Behind the massive concrete walls, a deep pit opened up, as if the earth had been torn apart to reveal an endless abyss. I stood at the edge of the valley, looking down. The buildings seemed to be just a facade, concealing a massive structure buried deep underground. Strange vibrations emanated from below, steady yet unpredictable. Each vibration seemed to compress the air around me, creating an invisible pressure on my body. I moved closer, trying to listen. The vibrations weren't just physical sounds. They carried a strange rhythm, almost like a language I couldn't understand. At times, I felt as though whispers were echoing from within the earth, but whenever I tried to focus on them, the sounds would vanish. The building had no main entrance, only a small doorway on one side, covered by a thick steel panel. I tried pushing the door, but it wouldn't budge. However, what unnerved me the most was the faint light emanating from inside through tiny cracks. That light wasn't normal, it was a pale green glow, resembling the light of an entity not of this world. I stood there, fear and curiosity warring within me. The vibrations from the ground grew stronger, as if they could sense my presence. I didn't know what I was facing, but I was certain that this building wasn't just a technical structure. It was a gateway to something dangerous, powerful, and far beyond human comprehension. As I turned to leave, a chilling sensation ran down my spine. I didn't look back, but I knew something was watching me from the shadows, and this was only the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen in the valley. The curiosity, though shrouded in fear, drove me to return the following night. This time, I brought a stronger flashlight and a small niffenot for self-defense, but just to feel like I had some kind of weapon in hand amidst the helplessness. The thick steel door still stood there, cold and unmoving. But when I tried pushing it again, something strange happened. It opened with a metallic screech, as if it had been waiting for me. I stood frozen for a few seconds, my heart pounding in my chest, before stepping inside. Inside the building, the air was even colder than outside. The smell of metal and chemicals hit my nose, forcing me to hold my breath. The pale green light, the same light I had seen through the cracks in the door, spread everywhere, covering everything with an eerie, nightmare-like aura. The first thing I saw were massive machines, with gears and pipes running throughout the room. The sounds coming from them weren't just ordinary mechanical noises. They were like breathing, groaning, as if the machines were alive. These machines didn't seem to just function. They seemed to live, and that sent shivers down my spine. As I ventured deeper inside, I came across a sight that froze the blood in my veins. Hundreds of people, or at least what was left of them, were suspended in midair, connected to large cables running from their heads, necks, and bodies into the machines. Their skin was pale, their eyes closed, but their chests rose and fell as if they were breathing. However, they weren't conscious, showing no signs of actual life. The cables seemed to be extracting something from their bodies, channeling it underground through massive pipes. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but a clear feeling arose within me. They were feeding something of being buried deep beneath the earth, something I couldn't even begin to imagine. I tried not to look too long at the suspended people, but my eyes were drawn to the large bags being transported out through a conveyor system. These bags were shaped like human bodies, but distorted, grotesquely deformed. I saw a few workers in protective suits loading the bags onto trucks' black vans, identical to the one I had seen the previous day. I wanted to run away, but my legs felt frozen in place. Every step I took echoed through the vast space, and I had the sense that the machines were watching me, even though they had no eyes. I moved closer to one of the machines, trying to look at its display screen, but all I saw were strange symbols and images I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, a loud noise erupted from deep within the building. The ground shook, and I felt as though something massive was moving beneath me. These vibrations weren't just physical, they seeped into my mind, causing a piercing pain in my head. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I turned and fled, but the images of the suspended people, the large bags, and the living machines haunted me. I didn't know what I had just witnessed, but I was certain that this building wasn't just hiding a secretive, was the center of something horrifying, something far beyond human understanding. And somehow, I had become a part of it. After escaping the building, I returned to my office with a troubled mind. The horrifying images I had just witnessed clung to me like a nightmare I couldn't shake off. I knew I needed to learn more, to better understand what was happening in this place. And that's when I remembered Nathan, the former manager of the plant. Nathan was a name often mentioned in conversations among former employees. They said he had mysteriously disappeared after spending many years working here. No one knew exactly what had happened to him, but I recalled that there was an old filing cabinet in his office that had never been cleared out. I hurried to Nathan's office, which had long been abandoned. The room was covered in dust, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the old wooden desks and locked drawers. I rummaged through the piles of papers and eventually found a journal, hidden carefully behind a secret compartment in one of the drawers. Nathan's journal opened up a world I could never have imagined. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, some smudged by ink stains, and traces of panic. He wrote about the rounds, a process that every employee at the plant had to go through. According to Nathan, the rounds weren't just ordinary tests or training sessions. They were a series of rituals, each round pushing people into a strange state, stripping away their humanity bit by bit. Nathan described how, after each round, he felt less and less like himself. His thoughts, emotions, and even his memories began to distort. Nathan wrote that the rounds weren't random. They were designed to transform people into tools, entities devoid of free will, existing solely to serve something deep beneath the ground. Nathan didn't know exactly what it was, but he could feel its presence. In one passage, he wrote, "It is not human. It is not a machine. It is something ancient, powerful, and incredibly dangerous. With every round I go through, I feel it drawing closer to me, as if it's infiltrating my mind through these machines and bizarre rituals." Nathan also mentioned a small group of people who had tried to resist the rounds. They called themselves the Awakened, but all of them either disappeared or were mysteriously punished. He suspected that they had been turned into those bags, just like the ones I had seen in the building. As I read the final entries in the journal, I could feel Nathan's despair in his words. He knew he couldn't escape. He wrote, "If anyone finds this journal, run. Don't try to investigate further. Don't let yourself become a part of this. It's too late for me, but maybe you still have time." I closed the journal, but Nathan's warnings couldn't stop me. I knew I had already gone too far. What I had just read not only explained the strange behavior of the employees, but also confirmed a terrifying truth. This plant wasn't just a place of production. It was a massive machine designed to sustain a supernatural, dangerous entity far beyond human comprehension. And somehow, I had become a part of this game. I never thought I would see Nathan again. He had been mentioned as a name from the past, a manager who disappeared into the shadows of the factory amidst rumors that he had taken his own life. But as I sat in the office, trying to piece together fragments from the journal, a faint sound came from the door. I turned around, and there he was. Nathan stood there, not as an ordinary man, but as a figure distorted by time and something unnatural. His stature was taller than normal, his eyes deep and hollow like two dark pits, and his skin was so pale it was almost translucent. A chilling cold enveloped the room as he stepped in, as if the air itself was being drained by his presence. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice trembling, unsure if I was seeing a real person or some supernatural entity. He nodded, but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he moved closer, each step slow but commanding. I felt frozen in place, unable to run, unable to do anything but face him. "I've gone through the 5th round," Nathan said, his voice hoarse and deep, echoing as if coming from a distant place. "And I am no longer myself." Nathan began recounting what had happened to him, things that the journal had only hinted at. He had once been an ordinary manager until he was forced to participate in the rounds. The first round was merely psychological tests, but as he progressed further, everything became increasingly strange and terrifying. In the 5th round, Nathan said he came face to face with what lay beneath the ground, a nameless entity, shapeless yet immensely powerful. It didn't just control the factory, it eroded the minds and souls of anyone who dared to come close. Nathan had tried to resist it, but failed. "I wanted to stop it," he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine as if trying to convey a message. "But I wasn't strong enough. Now, I am just a part of it, a tool like those people you've seen." A chill ran down my spine. Nathan was no longer human, but he still retained a sliver of will, a fragment of resistance. He explained that the entity beneath the ground was growing stronger, and that the factory was its source of sustenance. The suspended people, the large bags, and the massive machines, they were all part of the plan. "I can't escape," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "But you can. Leave this place before it's too late." I wanted to believe him, but I could sense the contradiction in his words. Nathan wasn't just a man who had been transformed. He was part of the entity, and I wasn't sure if he was trying to help me or leading me into a trap. Suddenly, Nathan stepped closer, his eyes glowing strangely. "You must destroy it," he said, his voice urgent. "Destroy the factory. Destroy everything. Don't let it continue to grow." I looked at him, unsure of what to do. Nathan, though altered, still retained a shred of humanity, a final hope to fight against what controlled him. But I knew that if I didn't act, I too would become a part of it. As Nathan disappeared into the darkness, I stood there, my heart pounding. This confrontation didn't just terrify me, it pushed me to a decision. I had to do something to stop this entity, even if it meant facing the most dangerous thing I had ever known. The atmosphere in the building was more suffocating than ever, cold and filled with isolation. Nathan and I were forced to participate in a part of the process, a step he called the final round. The remaining employees, or entities that were no longer human, appeared around us, their empty eyes threatening and ominous. A man dressed in a black cloak, his face concealed by a metallic mask, stepped forward. In his hand was a tray containing vials of dark red liquid, something Nathan referred to as the conduit. I looked at it, a chilling sensation running down my spine. Nathan whispered to me, his voice hoarse, "It's what connects us to the entity underground. Once you drink it, you will no longer be yourself." I wanted to refuse, but the soulless gazes surrounding us made me realize I had no other choice. Nathan, though already transformed, still retained a fragment of humanity. He looked at me, his eyes full of determination. "Drink it, but don't let it control you. I have a plan." We were forced to drink the liquid. The sensation as it flowed down my throat was horrifying, freezing cold, like thousands of needles piercing every cell in my body. I felt an unfamiliar energy invading my mind, as though a voice was whispering right next to my ear, tempting me to surrender my will. Nathan, despite having gone through the 5th round, still fought to maintain his sanity. He pulled me into a secluded corner, away from the light of the massive machines. His voice was urgent yet commanding. "I've prepared a way to destroy this entire system. The Ministry of Defense can shut down the power to the entire area, but we need to send a signal before the entity detects it." Nathan pulled out an old communication device, hidden within the folds of his coat. He explained that it was the only way to contact the outside world, which remained unaware of the factory's existence and the supernatural entity within. While Nathan worked to send the signal, I was tasked with distracting the entities that were beginning to close in on us. I ran through dark hallways, where the flickering light from the bulbs created an eerie atmosphere. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, growing closer, as if they were hunting me. Nathan finally managed to contact the Ministry of Defense. He requested them to shut down the power to the entire area, destroying the energy source that sustained the entity underground. But at that moment, a loud noise erupted. The entities had discovered us. They lunged at Nathan, trying to seize the communication device. I turned back and saw him struggling with them, yet still attempting to transmit the final signal. His eyes met mine, filled with determination and sacrifice. "Run. Don't let them catch you. I'll hold them off." I didn't want to leave him behind, but I knew that if I didn't escape, everything would be over. I ran through the dark hallways, Nathan's screams echoing behind me, mingling with the strange sounds of the entities. As I escaped the building, a massive explosion erupted. The Ministry of Defense had shut down the power, destroying the entire system. The building shook, the strange lights from within disappeared, and the entity underground seemed to be severed from its energy source. I stood there, watching the building collapse into darkness, my heart overwhelmed with emotions. Nathan had sacrificed himself to stop the entity, but I knew this battle wasn't over. What I had just experienced was only a small part of the horrifying secret buried underground, and I, whether I wanted to or not, had become the one to bring this story to light. I stood there, amidst the cold and overwhelming darkness, watching the building collapse with a resounding explosion. The flickering flames within the rubble were not enough to dispel the growing unease in my heart. Nathan had sacrificed himself, and I thought it was all over. But then, the ground began to tremble. At first, it was just faint vibrations, like a strong wind blowing through the earth. But they quickly grew more intense, as if something enormous was trying to break free from its chains. I looked down at what used to be the center of the building, now reduced to a deep, pitch-black pit like a giant mouth swallowing all light. Suddenly, from the darkness of the pit, a brilliant red light erupted. It was unlike any light I had ever seen, not the light of fire, nor artificial light. It was alive, as if it had consciousness, and it was staring directly at me. I felt a chilling sensation running down my spine, paralyzing me. That red light wasn't just light. It was like a giant eye, watching me, piercing through layers of flesh and bone, reaching deep into my mind. I heard whispers, unclear but enough to send shivers down my spine. These sounds didn't come from outside, but from within my own head. Words that weren't mine, yet echoed like my own thoughts. "You have awakened me." The voice resonated, deep and authoritative, as if it didn't belong to this world. I didn't know who or what it was, but I understood that this was the entity Nathan had warned about, the one that had been nurtured underground, now awakening. The ground continued to tremble violently. Cracks spread from the pit, like giant arms reaching out, trying to seize everything around. I tried to step back, but my legs felt frozen in place. That red light wasn't just watching me, it was pulling me toward it, like an irresistible, invisible force. I heard distant screams, chaotic sounds from other survivors, but they were quickly drowned out by the roar from the pit. It wasn't the sound of a creature. It was like the earth itself groaning, writhing under the power of what was emerging. The red light began to spread, illuminating the night sky. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of its form, not clear, but enough to feel the horror. It didn't have a specific shape like a mass of living energy, constantly shifting, constantly reaching out, but brimming with power and menace. "You cannot escape." The voice echoed again, this time stronger, like a command. I felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on me, as if I was being forced to kneel before it. But I knew that if I let it take control, I would no longer be myself. I tried to step back, one step at a time, despite the fear consuming my mind. But the red light didn't relent. It clung to me, like a never-ending nightmare. I don't know how I managed to escape. When I realized it, I had already run far from that area, my breath ragged, my body trembling, but I knew everything had changed. That entity had awakened, and the world would never be the same again. I looked back one last time, the red light still blazing, like a giant eye watching me, reminding me that this battle had only just begun. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and dust from the collapsed building. Darkness enveloped the area, torn apart only by the eerie red light still glowing from the deep pit. I could feel nothing but fear and cold creeping into every breath. The survivors, including myself, ran in panic, desperately trying to escape the area before the entity fully awakened. The sound of frantic footsteps echoed through the desolate hallways, blending with the roaring noise from the pit. I didn't know where I was running. I only knew I had to get as far away from this place as possible. But every step carried the feeling of being watched, as if the red light was still following us, stretching shadows like the hands of a malevolent demon. A scream rang out behind me. I turned and saw Francisco, a security guard I had met earlier, standing in the middle of the hallway, but he was no longer himself. His eyes were bloodshot, empty, devoid of humanity. In his hand was a metal rod, smeared with blood. Francisco charged toward a group of survivors, people who had gone through the rounds like me. He didn't say a word, acting only like a predator hunting its prey. A woman screamed as he grabbed her, but the scream was quickly cut off by the chilling sound of the rod striking. Blood splattered everywhere, staining the ground red. I was horrified, but I couldn't stop. Francisco was no longer human. He had become a tool of that supernatural entity, an unrelenting pursuer without mercy. The survivors scattered, running in different directions, but that only worsened the situation. Francisco, with extraordinary strength, systematically took down each person. I could hear his footsteps drawing closer, each step heavy and menacing. I dashed into an abandoned room, trying to hold my breath to avoid detection, The darkness in the room felt thicker, as if it was trying to swallow me whole. My heart pounded, each beat echoing like a drum in my head. Outside, Francisco's footsteps echoed slowly, as if he knew I was there. I struggled to stay calm, but the red light from the pit still seeped through the cracks in the door, threatening to drown out all my thoughts. I heard whispers inside my head, the familiar voice of the entity. "You cannot escape." The door burst open, and the red light flooded the room. Francisco stood there, his blood-red eyes staring directly at me. I had no way out. But just as he lunged forward, a loud explosion erupted in the distance. Another group of survivors had activated an explosive device to stop Francisco. The explosion shook the ruins of the building, causing Francisco to hesitate. I seized the opportunity to dash out of the room, sprinting toward an exit. The roar of the entity from the pit echoed, as if enraged that its prey was escaping. Finally, I saw the faint light outside the area, but I didn't dare look back. Francisco might still be chasing me, and the entity was undoubtedly watching. I knew that even though I had escaped this place, the darkness and terror from the pit would haunt me forever. Running was the only instinct I had left, but I understood that this escape wasn't just from Francisco or the entity. It was from everything I had witnessed, everything I had become after the rounds. I was no longer myself, and the world out there perhaps would never be the same again. The air around me was thick, cold, and suffocating, as if the darkness was tightening its grip on everything. We, the survivors, huddled together in an abandoned room, the faint light from the only flashlight barely enough to push back the enveloping shadows. Francisco sat across from us, his bloodshot eyes now calmer but still harboring an unpredictable menace. He sighed, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence. "You don't understand what you've awakened," he said, his gaze sweeping over each of us. "That thing. It's not just an ordinary monster. It's an ancient being, an entity that existed long before humans set foot on this land." A shiver ran down my spine. Francisco's words cut through the fragile veneer of calm we were desperately trying to maintain, like a sharp blade slicing through thin ice. "We found it," Francisco continued, his voice low and haunting, "in the deep mining tunnels underground. At first, it was just something vague, a strange energy source no one could explain, but then it started growing." He paused, as if struggling to find the words to describe it. "It's not just a creature. It's a consciousness, something far beyond our understanding, and it needs energy to exist. Not energy from machines or fuel, but from us, from the human mind, from fear and suffering." Francisco's words made the air in the room even heavier. I glanced around and saw the pale faces of the other survivors. Some whispered prayers under their breath, while others sat motionless, their eyes vacant. "It was sealed away centuries ago," Francisco went on, his voice tinged with a deep sorrow. "Those who knew about it tried to bury it forever, but we were foolish. We dug deeper, mined more, and in the end, we woke it up." I recalled the blazing red light from the pit, the feeling of being pierced by a giant, unblinking eye. It wasn't just a physical presence. It was the presence of something ancient, something that didn't belong to this world. "It cannot be destroyed," Francisco said, his voice trembling. "We can only run, but it will always find us. It will feed on our fear, our despair, and grow stronger. And once it's strong enough, no one will be able to stop it." I felt as though the ground beneath me was collapsing. Francisco's words weren't just a warning, they were a death sentence. That entity wasn't merely a monster. It was an ancient consciousness, a living nightmare, and we were nothing more than helpless prey in its game. Francisco's gaze turned cold and piercing. You think you can escape, but the truth is, no one can. Running only buys you time. It will always find you, and when it does, it won't just take your life, it will take your mind, your soul. The room fell into silence. No one said a word because no one knew what to say. What Francisco had revealed changed everything. That entity wasn't just a threat. It was an inescapable nightmare. And we, the survivors, were mere pawns in its game. I looked out the window, where the red light from the pit still glowed brightly in the darkness. It was waiting, growing stronger with each passing second. And I knew that no matter how far we ran, we could never escape it. The darkness still clung to me, even after I had escaped that area. My heavy footsteps trudged over jagged rocks, each step carrying a sense of unease as though I was being watched. The air outside was not the relief I had hoped for. It was cold, isolating, and eerily foreboding, much like the place I had just fled from. I collapsed beside a tree, my breath ragged, cold sweat streaming down my face, but I knew I couldn't stop. The creature beneath the earth was still alive, and it wouldn't end there. What I had witnessed wasn't just a nightmare, it was the beginning of a catastrophe I couldn't prevent. Dylan, one of the survivors who had been with me, disappeared right before I escaped. He had once been an ordinary man, but after going through the rounds, he started to change. Dylan's gaze became hollow, yet it held something terrifying as if he was no longer himself. I remembered the last moment I saw Dylan. He stood motionless before the deep pit, the red light from below illuminating his face, highlighting distorted features that no longer seemed human. Dylan had become part of it, an avatar, a manifestation of that ancient entity, and now he had completely transformed, becoming a tool for the creature to carry out its plans. I didn't know where Dylan had gone, but I knew he wouldn't stop. The creature needed energy, needed human minds to survive and grow, and Dylan, or whatever he had become, would be the one to bring it to the outside world. I looked up at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering, obscuring the faint light of the moon. A sense of dread welled up inside me. I knew this was only the calm before the storm. That creature wasn't just a threat to the area we had fled, it was a danger to all of humanity. As I stood up, my legs trembling but forcing themselves forward, I heard a whisper echoing in my mind. It wasn't my voice, nor the voice of anyone I had ever known. It was the voice of the entity, the one beneath the earth. You cannot escape. I am here, and I will always be here. I tried to push the voice away, but it lingered in my thoughts, like an unbreakable curse. I knew I was no longer myself. What I had experienced, what I had seen, would haunt me forever. My story doesn't end here. This is only the beginning. The entity has been awakened, and Dylan, its embodiment, has started to execute its plan to expand its influence. It won't stop, and I know that no one can stop it. I walked through the darkness, carrying a warning no one wanted to hear. The creature beneath the earth wasn't just a monster, it was a living nightmare, an immeasurable threat. And if we don't do something to stop it, humanity will face an inevitable disaster. The darkness swallowed me, but I kept moving forward. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to do something. I had to warn people. I had to tell this story. But deep down, I wondered if anyone would believe me, if anyone would be strong enough to face this nightmare. Dylan had disappeared, but he was still there, in the shadows, carrying the will of the entity. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, I could never escape it. The ancient entity had awakened, and the world would never be the same again.